evening. Our top story this week. In Georgia, a wicked witch of a CPS supervisor is charged with child abuse after beating her daughter with a broomstick. In Arizona, the child protective industry is still trying to figure out what to do about a computer glitch that could potentially affect thousands of CPS cases, nor do they know how much it's going to cost to fix it. Meanwhile, Arizona can't seem to find enough foster homes for all of the kids they've been snatching. In Connecticut, the court stopped sending kids who have broken the law to the Glen Mills School in Pennsylvania for rehabilitation after concerns emerged that the kids aren't being treated properly there. In Georgia, the child protective industry is being criticized after failing to protect 11 kids who died last year. In Tennessee, a federal judge told DCS officials that he is concerned about the reliability of their data in the computer system that they are using to track abused and neglected children. And in Maine, the child protective industry gets an additional $1 million in funding after increasing the number of foster kids in the state by 200 over the last year, while claiming that the increase is due to parental bath salt abuse. In Illinois, Catholic Charities is trying to get by with all of that money that they made from their foster care and adoption business after the state cuts them off last year over their refusal to sell kids to gays. In Nebraska, lawmakers schedule a hearing to deal with the abundance of kids who are aging out of the state's foster care system onto the streets. In North Carolina, officials are increasing the inspections of Mecklenburg County's child protective industry in response to a series of failure to protect cases. And in Massachusetts, foster kids are being prescribed psychotropic drugs at nearly 4 times the rate of non-foster kids. In Washington, a report is slamming the child protective industry because of their adoption system is lacking sufficient safeguards to protect children from being placed into potentially abusive adoptive homes. In Utah, adoptive parents are saying that there aren't enough kids available to adopt from foreign countries, while a biological aunt speaks out against the misleading practices of Utah's child protective industry while she fights to adopt her nieces and nephews who have been in foster care while CPS agents dragged out that case for too long. A new study is suggesting that the use of pacifiers is detrimental to the emotional health of babies. And amateur boxing in the USA has been suspended for 3 months after the president of the Amateur Boxing Association refused to step down after saying, quote, "Half of the girls were molested, half are gay, and child abuse is a good grounding for a career in boxing," end quote. In Ireland this week, the Catholic Church is to make a full apology to a priest who was wrongfully accused of sexually abusing children. In India, the Maha government pulls the licenses of 18 children's shelter homes. And the juvenile justice system in Manipur, India, has been suspended due to the corruption and misuse of the resources. In Sweden, a court decides not to deport a young girl back to her home in Algeria and lets the foster mother keep her instead. A new report is criticizing social workers in the Netherlands for failing to intervene in a case where 2 young boys were killed. Russian media sources begin to correct their false allegations concerning Finland's child welfare department after a Russian kid was snatched there a couple weeks back. And in China, a man divorces and sues his wife for being ugly and having an ugly baby after he married her without knowing that she had previously had thousands of dollars worth of plastic surgery. In Australia, a young couple pleads guilty for illegally harboring a foster child who they felt sorry for after she complained of being sexually abused while in care. Australia has finally moved away from the practice of sterilizing the intellectually disabled because human rights groups had called it inhumane and has started taking their kids and throwing them into foster care instead, which the human rights groups are calling inhumane. And in Canada, Alberta's CPS agents are experimenting with a new information management system that they say could reduce the number of foster child fatalities similar to those identified in a recent fatality inquiry. In England, an infertile woman is allowed to keep a baby who was stolen from Nigeria where she was tricked into thinking that she gave birth during fertility treatments. And British foster parents are so afraid of the red tape that they're asking for permission to get the kids' haircut, and they're afraid of letting them go on school trips. The child-snatching social workers of Hertfordshire Council were all worried about what the watchdog group Ofsted was going to find and say about them in their damning report. A British foster father who is accused of sexually abusing boys in his care has the charges dropped against him. A former social services boss stands accused of molesting a boy who was living in a children's home 30 years ago. And India joins in with Slovakia and starts protesting against the evil and unethical child-snatching practices of the British social worker. In entertainment news this week, the National Indian Child Welfare Association is criticizing Dr. Phil for a show he did with the former adoptive parents of a little Native American girl who went back to live with her real father. One of Octomom's ex-nannies who accused her of letting her kids sexually abuse each other last week is making a desperate plea to the child protective industry to investigate her accusations. And a British social worker is claiming that she was molested by the popular BBC DJ Jimmy Savile. A California foster mother is charged with child abuse of foster kids, including making them live in filth. A former California foster parent is sentenced to 14 years in jail for molesting a foster kid back in 2009. In Nevada, a lawyer for the defendant says that two sisters planned false sexual abuse allegations against their foster father, but he is ordered to trial anyway. And in Indiana, U.S. Senate candidate Richard Murdoch said that when a woman is impregnated due to rape, quote, it is something God intended, end quote. In Maine, an 11-year-old is arraigned in the death of a 3-month-old baby after she fed the baby her ADHD meds, then suffocated her. In Maryland, a 13-year-old who beat his 2-year-old foster sister to death is sentenced to therapeutic foster care instead of a detention center. In Texas, a CPS director, a supervisor, and a CPS agent are all put on leave pending the police probe into evidence tampering after they closed a case on a family just 6 days before a toddler died. And of course, they're blaming that failure on a shortage of CPS agents rather than their own incompetence. In Pennsylvania, a foster mother is facing charges after leaving a 4-year-old autistic foster kid alone in a hot car on an 88-degree day in September. The Pennsylvania foster father, who is accused of nearly beating his 3-year-old foster kid to death, waives his preliminary hearing. In New York, a nurse testifies that the son of Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy twisted her arm and kicked another nurse who was blocking him from taking his baby out of the hospital. And finally, tonight in Texas, a woman gets 20 years in jail after stealing Christmas presents designated for foster kids. For these stories and all the latest dirt on the child protective industry, visit www.legallykidnapped.com. And until next week, this is Baby LK.